So welcome everybody to the April M5 Mastermind session. We are here with Nicole. We are going to be talking all about your cycle and how that relates to nutrition and health. If you haven't been paying attention at all this year, we're doing an M5 Mastermind session every month on topics that you all want to learn more about, probably need to know more about. So we do have replays available. If you can't find them or don't know where they're at, just let me know. We have January through March available on YouTube. And we will have this recording available as well. But without further ado, I am just going to turn it over to Nicole. Go ahead and save your questions until the end. We'll have some time for Q&A then. And you'll just be able to put them on the chat, or you'll be able to hop on live and ask your questions there. I'll keep an eye on the Facebook group and Zoom, try to keep an eye on both so we get all the questions answered. But Nicole, go ahead and take it away.
Amazing. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Bendayan. I am a certified holistic nutritionist and menstrual health specialist. I actually can just share my screen because I have a little bit of my bio in there as well. And today I'm kind of just going to talk about the cycle and how that pertains to your fitness journey, and also phase syncing, which is something we're definitely going to get into. If you've never heard about it before, don't worry. I'm going to try to explain things in a way that's easy to really understand, and so you can get the most value. So, hello, I am Nicole. I have a bunch of different certifications in health and nutrition, and specifically women's health. So I want to show you a few things first. So this is the men's monthly hormonal cycle, right? It's pretty stable, it's casual throughout the month. And this is the women's monthly hormonal cycle. So you can see that there's tons of differences. So then, of course, I'm going to pose the question, why would we do things the same as men? Because our hormones impact so many different aspects of our lives. And they really need to be taken into consideration when you're talking about everything from nutrition, fitness, even your careers and relationships are all impacted by your cycle. So today I'm going to give you a menstrual cycle overview, and then I'm going to discuss fitness, your menstrual cycle, and hormonal imbalances and how that might impact your fitness journey and other things as well. And then we're going to break down each of the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle into a little bit more of the biology that's going on, because I think it's really important that you actually know what's going on within your own body so that you can kind of notice those differences and how your cycle is impacting you specifically, because we all do have our own patterns, but our hormones really do play a large role in that, and I'll discuss it further. And then we're going to talk about fitness as well as nourishment. And then I want to leave some time at the end just to take any questions that you might have, or if you need any clarification. So let's get into the cycle. And in order to know the cycle, you need to know at least the 2 major hormones throughout your cycle. So we have estrogen, and estrogen's main role is to stimulate the growth of the uterine lining and to develop and maintain female characteristics. But estrogen also has a ton of other roles in the body. So it maintains your bone health, it lowers your resting heart rate, you have a lower body temperature, it can elevate your blood sugars, and causes changes in the brain, among many other things. And then the second hormone is progesterone. And progesterone causes the uterine lining to form structures that are capable of nourishing an embryo if you do get pregnant. But it has a ton of other functions and effects that really help to balance out estrogen in the body. So, of course, its main role is, your reproductive hormones, but like estrogen, it also impacts so many other aspects of your life. So it can also relax blood vessels, it heals brain cells. It's really that calming hormone and promotes sleep and relaxation. So it's really important to know the difference between these 2 hormones, because our cycle is split up in a couple of different ways. I'm going to discuss for phase syncing purposes. So this is an overview of the menstrual cycle, right? And the cycle is from the first day of your period until the first day of your next period. And, we often hear that it's a 28-day cycle, but for a lot of people that can vary. So the normal optimal range is between 24 and 36 days. So it's also important to note that your menstrual cycle is like your fifth vital sign because it can tell you a lot about your overall health. And if your menstrual cycle is above or below that 24 to 36 day range, that's starting to signify that something might be up in the body and needs attention brought forward to it, right? So we start our cycle with the one that we all know and love, our menstrual phase or our period. And this is when we're actually bleeding. And your period should last about 3 to 7 days. Again, anything above or below that is starting to signify that something's going on in the body. And during your menstrual phase, your hormones are at their very lowest. And a couple of days into this phase is when a follicle, which is a kind of those sacs that house the sacs that house the egg within the ovaries, that starts to grow. And as those follicles start to grow, it produces estrogen. And estrogen is our dominant hormone in the first half of our cycle. So during the follicular phase, estrogen starts to rise. And then once estrogen reaches its peak, it will trigger another hormone so that we can release that mature egg. And that release of the egg is ovulation. Now, ovulation is the peak event in your cycle. And for phase syncing purposes, we consider the ovulatory phase the few days before and the few days after ovulation. Okay. And then after we ovulate, that follicle that once housed the egg now becomes what's called the corpus luteum and begins to produce progesterone. And progesterone is going to be your dominant hormone in the later half of your cycle. Okay. So during the luteal phase, that's really when progesterone is the most dominant. And now you can kind of see, if this already sounds a little bit confusing, don't worry, I'm going to break it down a little bit more. I just want to give you like a visual overview. But as you can see, ovulation is super, super important because in order for us to have that balance between estrogen and progesterone, we need to ovulate. So if you're not ovulating, of course, if you are pregnant, breastfeeding, on hormonal contraceptives, that will suppress ovulation. But if you're not, you should be ovulating. And if you're not ovulating, that is a clear indication of something going on in the body that needs attention brought forward to it. Okay. So I'm going to go over each phase more in depth. But before I do that, I want to talk about what phase syncing is. So phase syncing is the practice of tailoring your nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle to the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle so that you can truly optimize your overall life. And as I go through each phase, it'll start to become a little bit more clear about how these hormones and these hormonal fluctuations are really impacting so many different aspects of your life and why you should really work out in alignment with your cycle. So the hormonal fluctuations throughout your menstrual cycle has a direct effect on your energy levels, your heart rate, your blood flow, your metabolism, your muscle gain, your ability to access fat stores, and so much more. So we're really going to focus on that. If you want more content about how your cycle impacts your career or your relationship or other things, feel free to reach out to me later on. But we're really going to try to focus on working out and your fitness, as well as a little bit about nutrition. So let's get into talking about how fitness and hormonal imbalances interact, right? So a lot of women experience hormonal imbalances, and this has a direct effect not only on their personal lives, but on their fitness journeys as well. And hormonal imbalances such as estrogen dominance, PCOS, endometriosis, hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is a mouthful, they all have a direct effect on your fitness and weight loss journey. So for instance, those with PCOS have a significant difficulty losing weight. And I'm sure if you've been trying to lose weight and you are doing all of the right things and you're still not doing it and it's still not working, that can feel really, really defeating. But a lot of that has to do with our hormones. So for me, the primary goal is really getting your hormones in balance. And then hopefully weight loss will be that kind of side effect, because now you're actually able to access those fat stores. You're able to utilize the energy that you have, right? So these hormonal imbalances can also lead you to extreme fatigue, which again will directly impact your ability to perform at the gym and to be motivated. Also, the pain. Plateauing is a huge issue that I see, especially in the fitness community. If you've been dieting for a long period of time and working out excessively, you can see that plateau, those last 10 to 15 pounds that you just can't hit. That could really be due to your hormones and how that's interacting with the rest of your body. And I wanted to put this in here too, of just the lowered confidence, because not only can hormonal imbalances cause issue with your emotional regulation and your stress levels. And, those with PCOS have a twice as likely to suffer from anxiety and depression. Those with endometriosis are, I think, 68% of them will experience psychological distress. And that impacts every aspect of your life, right? So if you feel like you have lowered confidence, that can show up in going to the gym, you're not being motivated, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really important to get those in check so that you can really optimize your overall life. Now, the thing is, fitness and your cycle and your hormones have a very delicate balance with them, because, of course, if you have hormonal imbalances, that can directly impact your ability to lose weight and your fitness. But then also, fitness can directly affect your hormones. So if you are, living in alignment with your cycle and you're really nourishing your body, it's so beneficial. Obviously, we all know how beneficial it is to exercise and work out. But unfortunately, over exercising and not living in alignment with your cycle and really pushing yourself like, quote unquote, a man would, then that can lead to significant hormonal imbalances. So there's the HPA axis dysfunction. So the HPA axis is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So all of your different hormones are kind of working in conjunction with each other. And I see it a lot with those who, are exercising a little bit too much, that they may end up losing their period entirely. Because what happens there is that we are elevating our cortisol levels, and cortisol is our stress hormone. And when we have chronic elevated cortisol levels from either a very stressful life, which we all probably already have, and then also adding on top of that over exercise and undernutrition, that can really throw off the balance, because our bodies are always going to prioritize making cortisol over our reproductive hormones. And as I'm sure you might know or may not, that when we have a lot of cortisol in the body, that also impacts inflammation and also our ability to lose weight, especially in that tire around your hips, so early in the stomach and around the hips and the belly. So if you're seeing that, you're also seeing a lot of hormonal imbalances, it could have something to do with it. So again, loss of period and worsened symptoms. If we are just pushing ourselves throughout our whole cycle, we can end up having really negative symptoms, especially in the later half of our cycle, approaching our period, where we experience PMS or painful periods, etc. So I'm going to give you some tips about working with your hormones instead of against them. And then I'm going to go into really using phase syncing. So some overall tips. Eat within 2 hours of waking up. A lot of us see intermittent fasting as being this huge fad. Intermittent fasting can cause those elevated cortisol levels that can really throw off our hormones. And it's important to note that a lot of the information that we're getting about intermittent fasting has been done on studies with men and postmenopausal women. And you're going to see that in a lot of different studies, because the reproductive hormonal fluctuations are an added control factor or variance that have to be played into in research studies. So oftentimes we're just eliminated from that. So it's important when you kind of get a lot of the information that you know if your reproductive cycle is being taken into account. So eating within 2 hours of waking up can really help with your metabolism, your reproductive hormones, and really optimizing your fitness journey overall. I also suggest avoiding fasted workouts because, again, that elevated cortisol level, and avoid caffeine on an empty stomach. And those three kind of go in tandem because, if you're anything like I used to be, I used to wake up, go directly to the gym, work out for 2 hours, fasted, and have my pre-workout with a ton of caffeine in it. And that totally wreaked havoc on my hormones and ended up making me really, really puffy. Like I was working out twice a day, 5-6 days a week, and I was super puffy. And then I stopped doing that and I lost 20 pounds within, I think, like a very short amount of time. And that was because of the stress and inflammation and excess cortisol levels that I was experiencing. And of course, that also led to a lot of other issues of, why do I feel like this? I'm so exhausted and I'm not losing the weight. I'm not gaining the muscle and I'm just puffy. So what's going on? And that is because of that. So don't over exercise. Also, I'll talk a little bit about how you can really utilize each phase so that you know kind of when you need to take a step back or go a little bit harder. Also, it's so important to get enough calories as well as your macronutrients. But it's also super duper important to get your micronutrients. There's a lot of focus solely on macronutrients, so your proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, without that focus on micronutrients. And if we're not getting the micronutrients you want, so vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients, etc., then our bodies aren't going to function the way that they should. So it's really important to add in a variety of different plants and different produce, seeds, nuts, etc., like vary your diet so that you can get in all those micronutrients. You also want to avoid late night workouts because late night workouts can disrupt your sleep schedule. And especially for women, our sleep schedule is super important. So definitely prioritize sleep. Those late night workouts can make you feel a little bit wired and disrupt your sleep. So it's definitely, an added thing to go work out earlier in the day so that you're not disrupting your sleep. And then, of course, phase syncing your workouts and nutrition. So let's get into what that actually is and how you can utilize it. So we're going to talk about biology, fitness, and how to nourish yourself during each of these phases. Okay. So your menstrual phase, I talked about this a little bit, but your cycle begins the first day of your bleed and should last between 3 and 7 days. Again, if there's anything above or below that, starting to signify that something's up in the body. And at this time, your reproductive hormones are at their very lowest and your built up uterine lining, the endometrium, begins to shed. FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone, increases slightly to stimulate the development of several follicles, and only one follicle will continue to develop, producing estrogen. Okay, so as I also want to make note here that your period can tell you a lot about your hormonal activity in your previous cycle. So pretty much throughout the whole other cycle, your period will signify kind of the hormonal levels. So if you have a really heavy bleed, if you have a really light bleed, depending on the days, the colors, etc., that can tell you a lot about the hormonal activity over the previous cycle. So start to just pay attention to your period in a maybe more intentional way, rather than just being like, ugh, a period again, why am I a woman? It can actually be really, really beneficial to you and tell you a lot about your health and how you might need to tweak some things. So fitness during your menstrual phase, your body is working really hard. Your hormones are at their lowest. So you really want to slow it down and listen to your body during this time, especially in the first 2 to 3 days. So you want to really focus on rest and recovery, restorative workouts like yin yoga, Pilates, going for intentional walks, etc., can be really helpful. And potentially lower intensity and weight reduction. I think that a lot of with fitness, it's always about the progressive overload. So if you feel like you can't, lift as much during your period, or if you need an extra rest day, that might hinder your confidence. But with the knowledge that, hey, my hormones are a little bit lower at this point in time, that's having an impact on my muscles and my energy levels. So you know what, I'm going to take it down a notch and not push through, because if you try to push through and overextend yourself, you may end up burning out a lot quicker or creating hormonal issues throughout the next cycle. So really focus on intentional movement. Try to avoid strenuous activity, high intensity, and also plyometric and HIIT workouts are not as recommended during at least the first 2 to 3 days of your cycle. And then you also want to avoid inverted positions. So if you're doing yoga or doing some exercises that require you to be inverted, you may want to avoid that during your menstrual phase because of the energetic flow, and there may be something to do with endometriosis and making sure that you're actually able to eliminate your period, and inverted positions may hinder that a little bit. This is more of like an energetic thing, but there may be some physical responses as well. So that's just something to keep note of. So in regards to nourishment, you really want to focus on warm and easily digestible foods during this time. Our bodies struggle a little bit more with digestion during our periods. So warm, easily digestible foods like soups and stews can be really, really beneficial. Cooking your food a little bit longer, etc. You also want to increase iron and minerals. You may be losing about 2 milligrams of iron per day of your bleed, and iron is that oxygen carrier. So if you're not getting enough iron, or you're not replenishing that iron and your other minerals, you may experience a lot of fatigue, burnout, muscle weakness, etc. You also may want to avoid caffeine. Caffeine can hinder the absorption of iron and increase your cortisol levels. And also, if you take time off of caffeine, it's actually been shown that the effects of it will be better when you do consume it if you go a couple of days without it. So that can be really beneficial. It can also affect how much pain you experience, so cramping. So that's just something to keep note of. I know that coffee is a touchy subject for a lot of people, but especially during the menstrual phase, it's a good time to intentionally avoid it. You also definitely want to stay hydrated. And if you do experience pain, you want to focus, some really beneficial things can be raspberry leaf tea. So raspberry leaf tea is a uterine tonic. It can really, really help to limit the pain you experience. Also, ginger, Epsom salt baths. Magnesium is super, super important. About 50% of the population is deficient in magnesium, and it is super important. It has over 300 metabolic reactions in the body and can really act as a kind of nerve tranquilizing, muscle relaxing effect. And Epsom salt baths can really help with the absorption of magnesium. So that's something to think about. Also, avoiding excess salt, sugar, and too much red meat or dairy if you experience pain, especially. Now let's get into the follicular phase. So the follicular phase is once your period is over and lasts until around ovulation. So at this time, that egg follicle, so the sac that is housing the egg in your ovary, is developing and it starts to produce estrogen. Now, as estrogen rises throughout this phase, that egg follicle will start to reach maturity. And in order for you to achieve ovulation, you have to have sufficient levels of estrogen. So I want to point out here that that excess cortisol level, if we have too much cortisol and all of our kind of hormonal stores, those hormonal building blocks are being utilized to create cortisol instead of estrogen, then you're not going to be able to have those sufficient levels of estrogen. So it's really, really important that we try to reduce stress, and that is physical and mental stress. So the follicular phase is when you're getting those gains, okay? You have a lower resting heart rate and a lower temperature during this time. And why that can really impact your fitness is because you can actually, you have a lot more stamina. This is a great time to do some higher intensity things. You have more cardiovascular abilities. So you won't reach kind of exhaustion as quickly as you may in the later half of your cycle. This is also when energy is starting to rise. So there you go with the more stamina. And it's also been shown that you may have improved muscle strength during this time. So you can have higher increases in muscle strength at this time versus your luteal phase, and more endurance for those stronger workouts. So this is a great time to really focus on gains. I'm going to mention something in the ovulatory phase, but we have to recognize that as we kind of are starting to approach ovulation, injury may be a little bit of a higher risk. So that's something to consider as well as you start to approach the ovulatory phase. But specifically for the follicular phase, this is a really great time to do a little bit more cardio and to really utilize this phase and the extra energy and stamina that you have to do those stronger workouts or potentially longer workouts, etc. And with nourishing during this phase, your body is able to actually digest a little bit better. So fresh produce is really great during this time, getting in those micronutrients, especially the ones that we've lost during our period. More fiber, protein, and healthy fats. You also want to support estrogen production and metabolism with things like cruciferous vegetables. So that's broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, arugula, etc. As well as sprouts, fermented foods, and phytonutrients. So phytonutrients like organic soy or, tofu, tempeh, etc., as well as flax seeds are great for this as well. And that can really help encourage not just the production of estrogen, so we're really hitting those levels that we need, but also the metabolism and regulation of estrogen, which is really important because in the luteal phase, so the last little bit of your cycle, if there's that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone, so too much estrogen in relation to progesterone, that's where a lot of people are experiencing those PMS symptoms. So it's really important to help support the regulation of estrogen, so production as well as the metabolism and elimination. So now we're getting into the ovulatory phase. I know this is a ton of information just being thrown at you, so it might take a little bit to digest it. So feel free to rewatch on the replay. But let's go into talking about the second half of your cycle now. So the ovulatory phase. Now, ovulation itself is only about a 48-hour period. But for phase syncing purposes, we consider it the 2 to 3 days before and the few days after ovulation. So ovulation is the peak event in your cycle. And once that egg is fully matured, estrogen hits its peak, which triggers a hormone called luteinizing hormone to surge and the follicle to rupture, which allows the egg to be released, to be fertilized, and that itself is ovulation, the release of the egg. And your hormones can actually fluctuate between 30 and 50% daily around ovulation. So this is the peak event in your cycle and should not go disregarded because you can actually utilize a lot of that excess energy that you have and how kind of ovulation is impacting you to really optimize so many different aspects of your life. So let's talk about some fitness because you want to ride the high, but you want to be cautious during this time. So your ovulatory phase is where you're probably going to see peak performance. You have high energy, max endurance. So this is a good time to do HIIT workouts. For HIIT workouts, I try to keep them under 15 to 20 minutes and only about 2 to 3 times per week, just to make sure we're not over exceeding our cortisol levels. But during the ovulatory phase, that can be extended a little bit. You also have increased muscle strength and function, so you can hit your personal best and focus on muscle gain. Now, this is where I'm talking about with the injury and muscle strength. So follow me here. So in the days leading up to ovulation, those 2 to 3 days before ovulation, that's really when estrogen is at its peak. And that can cause your tendons and ligaments to be a little bit more tight, but your muscles to be a little bit more pliable. So it's been shown that there's an 88% increase in muscle and tendon injury during these few days surrounding ovulation. So it's really, really important that you warm up and you don't try to push past the pain. If you're experiencing knee pain or hip pain or any kind of joint or ligament pain, you want to really focus in on that because you don't want to, risk any sort of injury. Now, after ovulation, like I said here, after ovulation is when progesterone starts to rise and estrogen dips a little bit, right? But in those couple of days after ovulation, that's when your muscles and ligaments your tendons and ligaments are going to kind of tighten up and stabilize a little bit more, but you also have that increase in muscle strength and function. So those few days after ovulation are really when you're hitting that peak performance. So you have slightly less of a risk of injury, but you still have great muscle function. So those personal bests are great to do during that time. Now, when we're focused on our ovulatory phase, nourishment and nutrition, you can nourish your body with fresh produce. You really want to maintain blood sugar balance during this time. So making sure that you're not spiking your blood sugars with, those heavy carb meals or a lot of sugar, or even, fasting and then eating 1 or 2 really big meals that spike your blood sugar levels like crazy. You really want to make sure that our blood sugars are regulated and balanced, etc. So you can have a slightly more extended fasting window in the evening. So I still would recommend eating within 2 hours of waking up, but you can have a slightly longer fasting window starting earlier in the evening. You also want to support hormone metabolism and elimination with those same estrogen regulating foods, like I said previously, as well as anti-inflammatory foods and liver supporting foods, with some extra fiber, omega-3s, and zinc. And why it's really important to focus on anti-inflammatory foods and liver supporting foods is because your liver is where you are going to be metabolizing and eliminating these excess hormones. And that can cause a little bit of inflammation. So you really want to focus on that because, as we know, if we have inflammation in the body, that can really negatively affect so many different aspects and also cause that puffiness or that water retention or that excess weight around the belly. So you really want to focus on those anti-inflammatory foods to kind of counteract that and really support your body. Then as we enter into the luteal phase, the luteal phase begins a few days after ovulation and will last to the beginning of your next period. So as that egg follicle that once grew the egg and produced estrogen becomes what's called the corpus luteum, it will start to release and produce progesterone. And that will cause the uterine lining to develop blood vessels and glandular structures to potentially support a pregnancy. And then if the egg has not been fertilized, as you can see here, both estrogen and progesterone will begin to decline and trigger a new cycle. So if you remember, progesterone has a little bit more of a calming effect. So during this time, you may feel a little bit more calm, a little bit less motivated, a little bit lower in energy. So that's something to take into consideration. And then as both estrogen and progesterone drop, triggering a new cycle, this is where a lot of people will start to experience those PMS symptoms because of that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone, right? So that's why it's so important to focus on each phase individually so that by the time we get there, we've really helped and supported our hormones balance out and that we have sufficient amounts of each without them being too imbalanced. So during the luteal phase, you want to slow down a little bit, but really finish strong. So during this time, you have a higher resting heart rate and a higher basal body temperature. So your body temperature increases slightly during the luteal phase due to progesterone's thermogenic effect. And what this might mean, especially when it comes to fitness, is that you might be quicker to exhaustion and quicker to hit those cardio heart rates. So, if we have, if we're trying to maintain being in that fat burning heart rate zone, during the luteal phase, the cardio heart rate can come a little bit quicker. So you really want to focus on slower sets, really prioritizing rest and recovery, which I'll get to in a little bit. But what's also really cool is that during your luteal phase, your metabolism actually speeds up and you have better access to your fat stores. So you have the ability to access your fat stores, but that also means that you have lower access to your sugar stores. So kind of what can happen in the body with that means, again, if we're staying in that fat burning zone of our heart rate, that can really help to unlock those fat stores and really improve weight loss. But because we don't have as much access to those sugar stores, again, we can hit exhaustion a little bit quicker. So my tips for this phase especially are, don't burn yourself out. Take it a little bit slower, do some slower sets, and increase the rest between sets so that you're not hitting exhaustion as fast. You also really want to prioritize rest and recovery. And again, don't push yourself to a point that you're burning yourself out, because that can, again, negatively cause impacts on your PMS symptoms and, just feeling really low about yourself, etc. So when we're talking about luteal phase nutrition, like I said, your metabolism increases slightly during this phase. And your body's metabolism, especially of proteins and carbohydrates, increases a little bit too. So you really want to increase protein during this time, really making sure to get in those complex carbohydrates. Our body needs those complex carbs. So I would avoid doing any sort of like ketogenic diet during this time, especially because our body really needs those carbs. Also, smaller, more frequent meals can really help to stabilize our blood sugar levels and also avoid binge eating. You want to avoid, of course, things that can trigger PMS, such as excess salt, sugar, red meat, or anything that you may be intolerant to. So if you're intolerant to wheat or gluten or eggs, etc., you want to avoid it during that time, because that can increase inflammation and make PMS symptoms a little bit worse. You also want to nourish your body by not skipping meals. So limit your fasting window during this time and slightly increase calories. It's been shown that women need about between 200 to 400 or 500 extra calories during their luteal phase. And if you are still restricting calories significantly during this time, that can lead to a lot of PMS symptoms, and then also lead closer to binge eating. And, our body requires these nutrients. It's craving it. So that will often lead to binge eating. And if that's something that you have struggled with for a long time, or kind of don't know where that might lead, and of course, binge eating and disordered eating has a lot of negative effects, but can also impact you differently during the different phases of your cycle. So if you notice that before your period, you are craving a lot of food, you have headaches, and you end up binge eating, that might be considered PMS type C. So there's actually 5 different types of PMS, which I won't get into because that's a totally other conversation. But there's 5 different types of PMS, and PMS type C is considered cravings, which is cravings for, sugar and those simple carbohydrates. And there's 2 major reasons why that might happen. It can be because of an imbalance of blood sugar earlier on in your cycle. So dysregulated blood sugar earlier on in your cycle, from restricting calories. And then also because as our hormones dip, that can have a direct effect on our neurotransmitters, such as serotonin. And serotonin is your happy hormone. And if we don't have as much serotonin, the fastest way for our bodies to get that is through simple carbs. But that can also lead to those sugar crashes. So it's really, really important to, in that case, focus on mood boosting amino acids. So there's actually different foods that can help improve your mood. And that can also limit your binge eating or cravings during that time, which is interesting to think about. Again, focus on proteins, fiber, and complex carbs to really keep you satiated during this time and to really optimize that muscle growth. Cool. So I know that was a lot of information, But I'm going to cut it there and kind of open up for questions or anything you really want to talk about. So,
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. I do have
of
a
course,
clarifying question.
of course.
Specifically in the luteal phase, you said there's that increase of your metabolism and increase in hunger. You mentioned 200 to 400 calories, give or take. Is that for that phase or is that per day?
So it's per day. So
Okay.
an increase. So during that phase, increasing your caloric intake about 200 calories, you're still going to be in a deficit because your metabolism rises. So if you are going with a caloric deficit diet, that will just really help to make sure that your body's getting the nutrients that it needs. And it is about 200 to 400 calories per day of the luteal phase.
Awesome. Thank you. And then I know birth control is a big topic, and I know that's probably a whole nother conversation, but a lot of people go on to birth control to help, quote unquote, regulate their hormones. Do you have anything that you briefly just for time here, so we have time for other questions, but anything that you want to hit on with that?
Yeah, so birth control does not regulate your period. It gives you a false period and it really just suppresses symptoms. So, unfortunately, many women are not given informed consent when they go on birth control. And what I mean by that is to be told about the legitimate risks, the impacts that it has on the body, and also other options. So, birth control impacts, it depletes 6 specific nutrients, it impacts your gut microbiome. It impacts so many different aspects of your body. And, if we at least knew that, then we could kind of mitigate some of the symptoms that might come along with it. But also there's tons of other symptoms that can come, recurring infections and mood disorders, etc. Birth control is really the reason I got into what I do now, because I was on it for about 10 years and I experienced so many problems. And I felt like I wasn't able to be kind of an active participant in my healthcare because I felt like I wasn't really given informed consent, when I was 16 and throughout all of my years about, how it can increase the risks of certain cancers and affect the bone density later on in life, et cetera. So there's that. And also important to know that there are other options. So most menstrual related issues can be very well managed, if not completely repaired, through the right nutrition and lifestyle protocol. And it's really important that that's the first line of defense. I think it's really important that, we have access to birth control, especially everything that's going on in the States. But with that said, it's also really important that we have informed consent when it comes to it and have resources to go other avenues, because nutrition and fitness are such great ways to utilize and to really understand our hormones. And, just like what I've said, kind of throughout this whole presentation, of living in tune with those fluctuations of your cycle, you're going to be able to balance your hormones so much more effectively. And if you have a specific hormonal imbalance, doing it through a specific lens of that hormonal imbalance and working with a practitioner that knows what they're doing, that you trust, and that you really resonate with can be really helpful in managing a lot of those symptoms without the need for hormonal birth control. And the last thing I'll say about it also is that you can very effectively and safely avoid pregnancy naturally without the use of birth control, because we're only fertile for about 6 days of the week, 6 days of your cycle. And if you know when you're going to be ovulating because of the biomarkers, so the signs that your body gives you, you can really effectively avoid pregnancy naturally and increase your chances of conception. And that's not the rhythm method. That's only the symptothermal method is the only thing that I would recommend, because there's a lot of misinformation regarding that. But yeah, when you're on birth control, it's really important, if you do choose to stay on it, that you are getting enough nutrients. I have a couple of resources that'll tell you the specific nutrients that birth control depletes, and that you're getting a probiotic, and that you're really supporting your body if you do choose to stay on birth control.
Awesome. Thank you. No, that's fantastic. I know there's so many different questions, and like you said, even like all the PMS symptoms and A, B, probably, well, C, was mentioned. So yeah, people are gonna for sure, I'm sure, want to go see and access the resources that you may have. And we can pull up your contact screen again here at the end so people know where to go. But now is a great time to open it up for questions. I do see one on Facebook. I'll read that one out loud. For those that are watching live, go ahead and post them in the comments. Or if you are watching on Zoom, if you have a question that you want Nicole to answer, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you want to hop on video, that is fine as well. But let me go ahead and pull up the question here. This is from Carol. Was menopause and taking estrogen and progesterone addressed? Maybe the weight gain associated with not only menopause, but also taking estrogen and progesterone at the times, and possibly, exercise involved with that. Do you have much information on, people supplementing estrogen and progesterone, perhaps with the lack of those hormones with menopause?
Yeah, I mean, I don't focus too much on menopause. I really focus on the reproductive years and peak reproductive years, which are between like 20 up until about 40, 45. And I don't have too much information when it comes to regarding kind of the supplementation as you go through menopause. I know that there's a lot of things that you can do along with hormone therapy, but also aside from hormone therapy, that can really impact your weight loss as well as just how you feel genuinely. And it's really important that any kind of medical protocol that you're doing, you also are using in tandem a nutrition and lifestyle protocol. So that's kind of what I would say with that. Sorry that I couldn't give you more information specific to menopause, but I will say also for the others that are kind of worried about menopause too, is that phase syncing and living in tune with your cycle earlier on in life can really, really, really impact that transition through menopause.
Awesome. Hopefully that was helpful, Carol. And those questions, as far as menopause goes, we do have our January Mastermind. If you didn't watch that, that was all about menopause and hormones. I can share that replay for you. Just let me know. Amanda asks, hey, I have very irregular periods. Last month, she bled for 3 weeks out of the month. A few years back, she bled for 6 months straight and ended up having a D&C because even with birth control, she couldn't stop. And the doctors kept saying it was okay. Any suggestions to get this under control?
First of all, I'm so sorry that you experienced that. Not just the physical experiences that you were going through, but also having doctors just say that you're okay, even though you know that that's not okay and not normal. So I just want to say my heart goes out to you because I know how frustrating and disheartening that can be. So irregular periods are a reflection. Like I said, your cycle is like your fifth vital sign. So it can tell you a lot about your overall health. With the limited information that I have about you, I can't give you specific things. But what I would say is that those symptoms of irregular periods, menorrhagia, which is bleeding for extended periods of time, etc., are all symptoms of a specific hormonal imbalance. And it's really important to work with a practitioner, work with functional medicine doctors are also really helpful with this, that you're able to kind of analyze all of the different symptoms that you have. As well as if you're going to do hormonal testing that can really get down to the root cause of what you're experiencing so that you're able to kind of focus in on it and make sure that you are able to, like I said, get to the root cause and build off of that. Yeah, I would say there's tons of things that you could do. Like I said, most menstrual related issues can be really well managed, if not completely helped, through the right lifestyle and diet protocol. I had a client one time, she had super irregular periods. Her cycle would range from 21 days to 45 days, and her periods were usually about 10 to 14 days, so like 2 weeks long. And we were able to work together, and within 3 months, she was having periods all under 40, or cycles all under 40 days and periods under 7 days. And that, with just the right protocol that's specific to you as well. And I think that's really important, Kelsey. I'm sure you know that, everyone is a little bit different. We all have not only different biology, but we also have different lifestyles. And different experiences in life that all impact us. So it's really, really great to work with a practitioner that, you connect with, and that can kind of figure out where your specific issues are coming from, right? Because menorrhagia, that extended bleed, is a symptom of other things. So it could be PCOS, hypothyroidism, polyps, fibroids, etc. So it's really important to get to the root cause.
And when you say looking for a practitioner, is that specifically usually your OBGYN, or is there a different health professional that somebody should be looking for?
So I would say, of course, come to me because, hi, I would love to have you. But working with a practitioner that makes you feel seen and makes you feel like you're able to be an active participant in your healthcare, and able to actually work with you. So kind of what I would mean by that is, unfortunately, a lot of the experiences that I've had myself and that a lot of my clients or audience has had is that exactly this. You go to the doctor saying that you've been bleeding for 3 months or 6 months straight. What's going on? And they say, oh, no, you're fine. It's just part of being a woman, when it's definitely not. So in that case, I would say find another practitioner quickly. And also, unfortunately, like, I don't think it's with malice, but, we're only as good as the knowledge we have and the experiences that we have. And unfortunately, a lot of conventional doctors, the recommended nutritional training to become a doctor is about 25 hours throughout. So that's like one course throughout the entire, I think, 4 to 8 years. And with that, 70% don't hit half of that, and 14% are like way under half of that. So it's really important to, a lot of general health care professionals are really great for reactive medicine. But if you're trying to get down to the root cause of things, I would say work with someone from a more holistic view. So functional medicine doctors are really great, holistic nutritionists, and general healthcare professionals that take into account, first of all, women's hormones, as well as how lifestyle, nutrition, and fitness impact your health. And I think it's also great to have kind of a healthcare team. So like for me, with my clients, I often work kind of adjacent with their conventional doctors. So, I'll ask them to get specific tests done, and I'll kind of go through them a little bit more in depth rather than just being like a 3-minute conversation with a lot of healthcare professionals, or, tell them to go to their doctor and ask for specific things, offer specific things, in my practice, I focus a lot on education, because I think that when you know why something might be happening and what you can do about it, then you can be a lot more of an active participant in your healthcare and go to your doctor. I had a client who we suspected that she had PCOS. So she goes to her doctor, gets some testing done. And, we've already discussed it. We went through everything. And her doctor's like, yes, according to your hormones, you do have PCOS. It looks like you have a couple of cysts. Here's a prescription for birth control. And that was the only option she was given, right? And then my client goes, do you think that if I implement these specific health and nutrition things that could help? And the doctor's like, oh yeah, 100%, it will definitely help you. So why was that not, there's a disconnect there. And, with that, at least if you have the knowledge, or if you're working with, someone adjacent to your healthcare professionals, you can be more active in your doctor's appointments.
Yeah. And then you mentioned hormonal testing. So if somebody was to go get their hormones tested, is there a specific time frame in their cycle that would be best, or does it not matter? You just have to take into account, okay, I'm in the luteal phase. This is what I should see.
Absolutely. There is specific times that you should be tested. So a lot of what you'll read on the internet is day 3 and day 21 of your cycle. So day 3 is when that follicle will start to build up. But the issue with the day 21 is that that's a 28-day cycle, right? And a lot of us don't have 28 days. So the optimal time to do testing, you should be doing it twice. So in both phases. And day 3 of your cycle, so 3 days after you start menstruation, and then between 6 or 7 days before your next period. So if you're tracking your cycle and you know when you're ovulating, and then you know when your next period is supposed to come, it should be about 6 to 7 days before your next period. And make sure they test, try to get as comprehensive of tests done. The last time that I went in for testing, I fought with my doctor to test me appropriately with the appropriate hormones at the appropriate time. And, he didn't even ask me where I was in my cycle. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go find somebody else because it is important to test at specific times. And also important to note that when you do tests, the normal ranges are very broad. It's like for the general population. So they're very broad, and it might seem like you're in the normal range, but if you feel like crap, the likelihood is that it's not the normal range for you, right? So the normal and the optimal ranges are different, and your specific ranges may be different as well. So it's important that if you do get hormone tests done and your doctor dismisses you being like, no, you're normal, look more into it. And then, kind of don't take that as just like it is what it is, because I know a lot of the time when we have medical gaslighting being pushed onto us, we end up gaslighting ourselves and thinking that we're overreacting or thinking that it's not that bad, or et cetera. So just keep into consideration that the normal ranges are very broad and may not be normal for you.
Awesome. Well, we have a few more minutes. If anybody has questions, go ahead and post them, or if somebody wants to hop on live, you're welcome to do so. Nicole, I'm going to ask you to pull up your contact information again so people can take note of that. But we'll give everybody just a minute or two. We have a couple people watching live. I don't see anybody jumping at the bit here to pop on live to ask a question. Yeah, you guys might have seen Nicole. If you're on TikTok, man, she is on fire. That and up and coming on Instagram. Awesome. We'll keep an eye out for these questions in case anything last minute pops up. But if you do have questions specific for Nicole, you're welcome to reach out to her. Is Absolutely. There a specific area somebody should reach out to you, a platform perhaps that somebody could contact you to get a question answered?
Yeah, feel free to email me or DM me on Instagram. TikTok, probably not the best place to do it, but Instagram DMs or the best way overall is definitely through email.
Awesome. Well, everybody say thank you. Thank you again, Nicole, for sharing all of this information. This has been super valuable, not only for me, I'm sure, but for everybody else here. But we'll go ahead and cut off this recording. Do you have any last minute advice for people?
No, I guess just reach out to me if you want to learn more, or if you're struggling with something, or again, if you want to work in tandem with anybody, then 100% feel free to reach out. I'm overly happy to help.
Awesome. Well, we will go ahead and stop that recording. Thank you, everybody, for hopping in and watching. Stay tuned for our next month. We're getting the April one out of the way early, but we'll be announcing what our May Mastermind is eventually here. But yeah, thank you again, Nicole, for all of your valuable knowledge and sharing that with us. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to her, okay? All right.